The wolf pup's breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. Blood matted its silver fur where something had torn into its side. Maya knelt beside the small body, her heart racing as she pressed her hands against the wound. She'd found injured animals before, but never anything like this. Never something that made her skin tingle with an energy she didn't understand. The forest around her was too quiet. No birdsong. No rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Just the pup's labored breathing and the sound of her own pulse hammering in her ears. Maya's fingers trembled as she reached into her herb pouch, the familiar weight of dried plants and tinctures, a small comfort against the strangeness of this moment. "Shh, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind through the trees. The lavender and comfrey she'd been gathering would have to wait scattered on the ground beside her. This pup needed her now. Something about its stillness, the way it watched her with those two bright eyes, made her chest tight with urgency. Her fingers worked quickly, cleaning the wound with water from her flask. The cuts were deep, precise, not the random tears of a wild animal attack. These looked deliberate. The pup whimpered, but didn't try to bite her, didn't even flinch away from her touch. Its eyes, an unusual golden color that reminded her of summer honey, watched her with what looked almost like human intelligence. Maya shook off the strange thought and focused on her work, pressing clean cloth against the worst of the bleeding. As she pressed healing herbs against the torn flesh, warmth spread through her palms. The sensation was stronger than usual, more insistent. It had been happening more often lately, this heat that seemed to speed the healing process along paths she didn't quite understand. Maya didn't question it anymore. Some people had a gift with plants, others with animals. She'd learned to be grateful for whatever edge she had in this dangerous world, where living alone meant every skill could be the difference between survival and death. The warmth pulsed through her hands, and she watched in amazement as the pup's wounds began to close. Not completely, but enough to stop the bleeding, enough to give him a chance. The pup's breathing steadied, some of the tension leaving its small body, and Maya allowed herself a small smile. "There you go," she murmured, stroking the soft fur between his ears. "You're going to be—" A twig snapped behind her. Maya's blood turned to ice. She'd been so focused on the pup that she'd forgotten the first rule of survival her parents had drilled into her. Always watch your surroundings. Always have an escape route. Always assume you're being hunted. Her hand moved instinctively to the knife at her belt, fingers closing around the worn leather grip as she turned slowly. A man stepped out from behind the trees, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his presence that made the forest itself seem to hold its breath, like even the wind was waiting to see what he would do. Power radiated from him in waves that made her skin prickle with awareness. It was his eyes that made her freeze completely. Golden eyes. Just like the pup's. "Don't move," he said, but his voice wasn't threatening. It was rough, like he hadn't spoken in hours, and there was something in its deep timbre that made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. Not fear, though fear should have been her first response to finding a strange man in the middle of nowhere. "I was helping," Maya said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when her heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. The pup was hurt. The man's gaze flicked to the small wolf in her lap, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression, a tension easing that she hadn't realized was there. The lines around his eyes softened slightly. "I know," Maya blinked. "You know?" Her grip tightened on her knife hilt, though she hadn't drawn it yet. "How could you possibly?" "Because I've been watching you." He took a step closer, moving with a predator's grace that should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself caught by the careful way he moved, like he was trying not to spook her. "And because that pup is my nephew." Maya's world tilted sideways. The golden eyes. The intelligence in the pup's gaze. The way her skin had been tingling since she'd first touched him, like electricity was running just under her skin. "That's impossible, is it?" The man crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level without getting too close. His movements were fluid, controlled, but she caught the tension in his shoulders, like he was holding himself back from something. "Look at him, Maya. Really look." She didn't ask how he knew her name, Somehow, it didn't surprise her. Nothing about this moment felt normal or safe, but she found herself studying the pup in her arms anyway. As she watched, his wounds were already closing further, healing faster than should have been possible even with her help. The torn skin was knitting itself together, new fur already beginning to grow over the pink scars. "What is he?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The same thing I am." The man's voice was gentle now, almost careful, like he was trying to ease her into something that would shatter her understanding of the world. A shifter. A wolf. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was sure he could hear it. Shifters were stories. Legends. Things parents used to scare children into staying close to home after dark. Except her parents had never told those stories. They'd told different ones. Darker ones about why they lived alone in the forest, why they never went to town, why Maya must never let anyone see her heal. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Her parents' fear. Their isolation. The way they taught her to hide her gifts as if her life depended on it. Maybe it had. "My name is Kieran," the man said, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. "I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territory." Maya's blood went cold. Even she had heard whispers of the Alpha King when she'd ventured into the small towns for supplies. A shifter lord who ruled vast territories and commanded packs of wolves. A figure of power and violence that normal humans feared and avoided. Stories told in hushed voices about a leader who could kill with his bare hands and commanded absolute loyalty from his followers. "I should go," she said, but when she tried to stand, her legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt like water, unsteady and weak. "Wait." Kieran's hand moved toward her, then stopped mid-air when she flinched. He let it drop back to his side. "Please. You saved him. You saved my family." His voice carried something raw, vulnerable, something that didn't match the dangerous reputation she'd heard whispered in taverns and trading posts. "I would have helped any injured animal," Maya said, though her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I know." Something in his tone made her look up, meeting those golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her. His gaze was intense, searching her face like he was looking for something specific, something he needed to find. "That's what makes you perfect." Maya's breath hitched. Perfect for what? Kieran was quiet for a long moment, and Maya became acutely aware of how isolated they were, how far from any help she might call. Her nearest neighbor was miles away, and even they barely knew she existed. But strangely, she didn't feel afraid of him. Confused, overwhelmed, but not afraid. There was something in his stillness, his careful distance, that spoke of restraint rather than threat. "You're my mate," he said finally, the words dropping into the silence like stones into still water. Maya blinked, sure she'd misheard. "You're what?" "My destined partner, the other half of my soul." Kieran's voice was rough again, like the words were being dragged out of him against his will. "I felt it the moment you touched him. The bond recognized you." "That's ridiculous." Maya scrambled to her feet, the pup still in her arms. Her legs were unsteady, but adrenaline gave her the strength to move. "I don't even know you." "The bond doesn't care about that." Kieran rose too, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was even taller than she'd realized, broad enough to block out the sun filtering through the trees. "It's deeper than knowing someone. It's about recognizing them." "I don't recognize anything." But even as Maya said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Something had been pulling at her chest since he'd appeared, a strange sense of rightness that she didn't want to acknowledge, like a compass needle finding true north, like coming home after a long journey. "You feel it too," Kieran said, and it wasn't a question. His eyes were fixed on her face, reading every micro-expression. Maya took a step back, her shoulders hitting the rough bark of a tree. "This is insane. People don't just belong to each other." "Not people. Wolves." His eyes never left her face, and she caught a flash of something wild in their golden depths. "And you're not entirely people, are you, Maya?" Her breath hitched, caught between her lungs and her throat. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means your healing gift isn't natural." Not human natural anyway? Kieran moved closer, and Maya found herself trapped against the tree trunk. But he stopped just outside her personal space, close enough that she could smell him. Something clean and wild like mountain air and pine needles. It means there's a reason you can fix things that should stay broken. Maya's hands shook where they held the pup. My parents were human. Were they? Kieran asked gently, his voice soft with something that might have been sympathy. Or is that just what they needed you to believe to keep you safe? Maya's chest tightened. Her parents who lived in isolation. Her parents who taught her to hide her abilities like they were something shameful and dangerous. Her parents who died when she was 16 and never told her why they were really running. Why they'd chosen a life of hiding over whatever they'd left behind. Were they? Kieran asked again, even more gently. Before Maya could answer, the pup in her arms stirred. She looked down just in time to see him shift, his form blurring and changing between one breath and the next. Where there had been a wolf pup, she was now holding a human child with golden eyes and dark hair. A boy who couldn't be more than 5 years old, looking up at her with the same too intelligent expression. Maya nearly dropped him, her arms going slack with shock. This isn't possible. It's very possible. Kieran reached out slowly, like she was a wild animal he didn't want to spook. His fingers were warm when they brushed her arm, steadying her. You're one of us, Maya. You always have been. The child in her arms looked between them with curious eyes. Uncle Kieran, he said, his voice small but clear. She smells like pack. Like family. Maya stared down at him, her mind reeling. He was warm and solid and completely human now, but she could still feel the echo of his wolf form in her arms. Could still sense the wildness just beneath his skin. No. Maya shook her head hard enough to make her vision blur. No, I'm not. I'm human. I'm normal. I live alone and I gather herbs and I don't have anything to do with your world. My world destroyed your family, didn't it? Kieran's voice was soft, understanding, the kind of gentle tone someone used when handling broken things. That's why you're afraid. Maya's chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She hadn't talked about her parents' death in years. Hadn't let herself think about that night, the smell of smoke and the sound of her mother screaming her name. How could you possibly know that? Because I can smell the fear on you. Old fear, deep fear. Kieran's expression darkened, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. And because there aren't many reasons a shifter family would hide in human form for years. Maya's world felt like it was crumbling around her, every certainty she'd built her life on suddenly suspect. They weren't shifters. They were. And now you're alone because of it. Kieran was close enough to touch her now, but he kept his hands to himself. She could feel the restraint in every line of his body, the careful way he held himself back. I'm sorry that happened to your family. I'm sorry you've been hiding for so long. Maya felt tears threatening and hated herself for the weakness. She'd survived 16 years on her own. She didn't cry. She didn't break down. She certainly didn't fall apart in front of strange men who claimed impossible things about her heritage. I don't want to be what you're saying I am, she whispered, the words torn out of her against her will. Why? The question was simple, but his tone suggested the answer mattered. Really mattered. Because your people killed mine. The words came out harsh, angry, all the pain she'd been carrying for years suddenly boiling over. Because shifters are violent and territorial, and they destroy everything they touch. Kieran flinched like she'd physically struck him. The pain that flashed across his face was so genuine it made her chest ache. Not all of us. How do I know that? Maya's voice broke despite her efforts to keep it steady. How do I know you're not just like whoever drove my family into hiding? How do I know you won't hurt me too? Because I'd die first. The certainty in Kieran's voice made her look up, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since he'd appeared. What she saw there stole her breath. Raw honesty, vulnerability, something so fierce and protective, it made her knees weak. The mate bond doesn't just connect us, Maya. It makes your safety more important to me than my own life. That's not healthy, she said automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. It's not human. Kieran's mouth curved in a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But we're not human, are we? Maya looked down at the boy in her arms, at Ethan with his golden eyes and his easy acceptance of impossible things. He was watching her with something that looked like hope, like he was already planning the games they'd play and the stories she might tell him. Family. Pack. Things she'd never had after her parents died. Things she'd convinced herself she didn't need. I don't know how to be a shifter, she whispered, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff. I could teach you. Kieran's voice was careful, hopeful, but trying not to push. If you wanted to learn. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. Everything in her wanted to run, to go back to her safe isolation, and pretend this conversation had never happened. But looking at Kieran, feeling that strange pull in her chest, like gravity, drawing her towards something she'd been searching for without knowing it, she wasn't sure running was an option anymore. What would that mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Learning? It means coming with me, back to my territory. Kieran's eyes were intense on hers, golden and warm and absolutely focused. It means letting me show you what you are, what we could be. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and promise. Maya's breath caught in her throat. And if I don't like what I find? Then you leave. No one will stop you. Kieran's voice was steady, certain. I won't stop you. Maya searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint that he was lying, but all she saw was sincerity and something that looked dangerously like love. You promise? I promise. Kieran held out his hand, palm up, fingers slightly curved. An invitation, not a demand. What do you say, Maya? Will you let me show you where you belong? Maya stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything, that there would be no going back to her simple, safe life. But maybe that life had never been as safe as she'd thought. Maybe it was time to stop running from what she was. Maybe it was time to find out what she could become. Slowly, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it, she reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin touched, warmth spread up her arm like liquid sunlight. Something clicked into place in her chest. A piece of herself she hadn't even known was missing. Kieran's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and careful, and Maya felt like she was finally breathing properly for the first time in years. Okay, she said, and meant it. The drive to Kieran's territory felt like crossing into another world entirely. Maya sat in the passenger seat of his truck, watching familiar landscape give way to something wilder, more primal. The boy, Ethan, she'd learned, was curled up between them with his head on her lap, one small hand fisted in the fabric of her shirt like he was afraid she might disappear. Every mile took her further from the life she'd known, and deeper into something that both terrified and thrilled her. The trees grew taller here, older. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle. She could smell things she'd never noticed before, the musk of animals, the green scent of growing things, something that might have been magic. You're thinking too hard, Kieran said, glancing over at her. His voice was amused, but she caught the concern underneath. I can practically hear the panic. Maya looked down at her hands, clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Maybe because I'm panicking. She forced herself to loosen her grip, flexing her fingers to get the blood flowing again. What if your pack doesn't accept me? What if they see me as an outsider? They'll see you as their Luna. Kieran's voice was confident, but Maya caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel just a little too tight. They'll respect that. The title sent a shiver down her spine. Luna. She'd heard the word whispered in stories, always spoken with a mixture of reverence and fear. The alpha's mate, the mother of the pack, second only to the alpha himself in authority and power. Will they? She asked, voicing the doubt that had been growing with every mile. Respected, I mean. Kieran was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was choosing his words carefully. "They'll learn to." That didn't sound as reassuring as he'd probably meant it to. Maya looked out the window at the dense forest rushing past, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. Everything looked wilder here, more primal, like civilization was just a thin veneer over something much older and more dangerous. "What if I can't shift?" she asked suddenly. The fear had been building since Ethan's transformation, a cold knot in her stomach. "What if whatever I am, it's not enough?" Kieran's hand found hers across the space between their seats, his fingers warm and reassuring. "Then we'll figure it out together. There's more than one way to be Pack, Maya. More than one way to belong." His touch sent warmth spiraling through her, that same rightness she'd felt when they'd first touched. Ethan made a soft sound in his sleep, burrowing closer to her warmth, and Maya felt something in her chest loosen. Maybe she didn't have all the answers yet. Maybe she didn't need them. When they finally reached the pack grounds, Maya's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't what she'd expected at all. Instead of some primitive camp or collection of crude shelters, she saw a sprawling community of modern cabins and buildings nestled among the trees like they'd grown there naturally. People moved between them with easy familiarity, children's laughter echoing from somewhere she couldn't see. It looked normal, safe even. Like a place where families lived and thrived instead of just survived. "This is home," Kieran said, parking near a large central building that managed to look both welcoming and imposing. "The main house is where we'll stay. Ethan's room is there too." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. The moment she stepped out of the truck, she felt eyes on her like a physical touch. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People turned to stare with expressions ranging from curious to wary to openly suspicious. Her instinct was to run, to get back in the truck and demand to be taken home. But Ethan's small hand slipped into hers, trusting and warm, and she forced herself to stay calm. These people were his family. They'd loved him enough to search for him when he was hurt. That had to count for something. Alpha. A tall woman approached them, her movements confident, but respectful. Her gaze flicked between Kieran and Maya with sharp intelligence. "We felt you return. Is this my mate?" Kieran said simply, his voice carrying clearly across the sudden hush. "Maya. She's the one who saved Ethan." The woman's expression shifted immediately, suspicion melting into something warmer. Relief, Maya realized. These people had been genuinely worried about the child. "Thank you," she said, and Maya heard the depth of her gratitude. "I'm Sarah, Kieran's beta. We've all been worried sick about the little one." Maya managed to smile, though she could still feel the weight of dozens of stares. Some curious, some suspicious, some openly hostile. The attention made her skin crawl, every instinct screaming at her to find somewhere to hide. "He's going to be fine, just needs rest, and probably a good meal." "Of course," Sarah gestured toward the main house, falling into step beside them. "I'll have the kitchen prepare something. He's been asking for chocolate chip pancakes for days." Ethan perked up at that, his eyes brightening. "With whipped cream?" Sarah laughed, ruffling his hair. "With whipped cream. And berries if you eat your vegetables." The easy affection between them made Maya's chest ache with something she couldn't name. When was the last time someone had worried about her eating her vegetables? When was the last time anyone had cared enough to make her favorite food just because she'd asked? They were halfway to the building when Maya felt the change. It started as a prickle at the base of her skull, a sense of wrongness that made her steps falter. Around them, pack members were going still, heads turning toward the forest with sharp alertness that made her skin crawl. "Get inside," Kieran ordered, his voice changing to something harder, more commanding. The easy warmth was gone, replaced by the alpha authority she'd heard whispered about in fearful tones. Now. But it was too late. The sound of engines, too many of them, was already echoing through the trees. They burst from the forest in a cloud of dust and exhaust. Trucks and motorcycles carrying men who moved with the same predatory grace Maya had seen in Kieran. A lot of them. Maya instinctively pulled Ethan closer as Kieran stepped in front of them both, his body going tense with barely controlled violence. Around the clearing, his pack members were doing the same, forming protective barriers while moving their own children and vulnerable members back towards safety. Well, a man emerged from the lead truck, and Maya's blood went cold the moment she saw him. He was tall and broad like Kieran, but where Kieran's presence felt like controlled strength, this man radiated something darker, crueler. He smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. It was the smile of a predator that had cornered its prey. "Marcus." Kieran's voice was deadly calm, but Maya could feel the rage vibrating through him like a plucked string. "You're trespassing." I?" Marcus's gaze swept the clearing with casual arrogance before settling on Maya with uncomfortable intensity. She felt exposed under that stare, like he was cataloging her weaknesses. "I heard some interesting rumors about a rare find, a healer with no pack." Maya's stomach dropped. The way he looked at her, like she was something to be owned and used, made her feel sick. Beside her, she felt Kieran go rigid with barely controlled fury. "She's under my protection," Kieran said, each word precise and sharp as broken glass. "Is she?" Marcus tilted his head with mock curiosity, his smile widening. "Because from what I understand, she's never formally joined a pack, never been claimed. That makes her fair game, doesn't it? Law of the strongest and all that." Maya felt like she was listening to them discuss livestock, the casual way they talked about her fate, like she was property to be claimed and traded, made her want to scream. "She's my mate." The words came out as a growl that made several of Marcus's men step back nervously. Maya felt the sound in her bones, felt her body respond to it in ways she didn't understand. Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Has she accepted the bond? Has she taken your mark? Because if not, then she's still unclaimed territory." His smile turned predatory, and Maya saw something hungry and cruel in his eyes. "And I do love acquiring new territory." "I'm standing right here," Maya said, her voice carrying more clearly than she'd expected. Both alphas turned to look at her, and she fought the urge to step back under their combined attention. "I can speak for myself." Marcus's smile widened with genuine delight. "How refreshing. Most healers are so timid. Tell me, little healer, what do you know about pack law?" Maya lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "Nothing. And I don't care to learn." "You should. Because according to our oldest laws, any shifter without pack protection can be claimed by right of challenge." Marcus's eyes glittered with something ugly, possessive. "The strongest alpha wins the prize." The word prize made Maya's skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral. Around them, the tension was building to a breaking point. She could feel Kieran's restraint fraying, could see the way the other pack members were positioning themselves for a fight. Kieran moved slightly, putting himself more fully between Maya and Marcus. "She's under my protection. That's not changing." "Then you accept my challenge?" Marcus spread his hands with false reasonableness. "Excellent. When you lose, the healer comes with me. My pack has great need of her skills." "And when I win," Kieran's voice was deadly quiet, carrying a promise of violence that made Maya shiver. "You and your men leave my territory and never return." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. They were going to fight. Over her, like she was a prize to be won instead of a person with her own will and agency. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Ethan was still clinging to her hand, and there was nowhere to go with Marcus's men surrounding them. "Kieran," she whispered, but he was already pulling off his shirt with efficient movements. "Take Ethan inside," he said without looking at her, his attention fixed on Marcus. "Let Sarah keep you both safe." The sight of his bare chest, marked with scars that spoke of old battles, made something clench in Maya's stomach. "I don't want you to do this." That made him pause. He turned to meet her eyes, and she saw something vulnerable flash across his face, something that looked like fear. "I have to. It's the only way to keep you safe." Maya's throat tightened. "What if you lose?" I won't. But she heard the uncertainty he was trying to hide, saw the way his jaw tensioned with the effort of appearing confident. The fight was brutal and swift, but it felt like it lasted hours. Maya watched from the main house steps, Ethan pressed against her side, while Sarah and several other pack members flanked them protectively. She'd never seen anything like it. Two powerful men moving with inhuman speed and strength, neither giving any quarter. Kieran was faster, his movements fluid and precise, but Marcus was vicious, fighting dirty in ways that made Maya's stomach turn. He went for injuries that would slow his opponent down rather than clean kills, aiming to weaken and disable rather than end things quickly. Maya found herself gripping the porch, railing so hard her knuckles went white, her breath coming in short gasps as she watched the man who claimed to be her mate fight for the right to keep her. Every time Marcus landed a hit, every time Kieran stumbled or showed signs of fatigue, her heart clenched with fear she hadn't expected to feel. When Marcus's claws raked across Kieran's ribs, leaving deep gashes that immediately began bleeding heavily, Maya couldn't stay silent anymore. The sight of his blood, dark and wet against his skin, sent panic racing through her like fire. "Stop," she called out, her voice breaking on the word. "Just stop." Neither man paid her any attention. They were lost to the violence now, circling each other like the predators they were. But Maya could see that Kieran was tiring, the wounds taking their toll, while Marcus seemed to have endless stamina. When Marcus landed a vicious hit that sent Kieran sprawling in the dirt, Maya made her choice. She ran, not away, toward them, toward the fight and the danger and everything her rational mind screamed at her to avoid. Because watching Kieran get hurt, possibly killed, was worse than any risk to herself. "Maya, no!" Sarah shouted behind her, her voice sharp with fear and command. But Maya was already kneeling beside Kieran's fallen form, her hands finding the worst of his injuries automatically. Blood soaked through her fingers, warm and too much of it. His breathing was labored, his face pale with pain and blood loss. "Don't!" Kieran gasped, trying to push her away with what little strength he had left. "Too dangerous. Let me help you." Maya pressed her palms against the deepest gashes, feeling that familiar warmth building in her chest. But this time, it was stronger, more insistent, like something had been unlocked by her fear and desperation. "Please, let me choose this." She felt Kieran go still beneath her hands, his eyes widening as he understood what she was saying. Around them, the clearing had gone silent. Even Marcus had stopped advancing, watching with hungry fascination as power began to flow between them. "Your choice," Kieran said quietly, and Maya heard everything he wasn't saying. Her choice to help him, her choice to use her gifts openly, her choice to stand and fight instead of running away, her choice to accept what she was and who she wanted to be. The healing light that poured from her hands was brighter than anything she'd ever produced before. It felt like touching sunlight, warm and clean, and absolutely right. She could feel Kieran's body responding, damaged tissue knitting itself back together under her touch. The worst wounds closed completely, new skin forming over the injured areas until no trace of damage remained. But the effort left her drained in a way she'd never experienced. The world spun around her, colors bleeding at the edges of her vision as exhaustion crashed over her like a physical weight. "Maya," Kieran's voice sounded very far away, though she knew he was right beside her. "Maya, stay with me," she tried to answer, tried to tell him she was okay, but darkness was pulling at her with irresistible force. The last thing she saw was Marcus's face, wearing an expression of such intense greed that it made her blood run cold. Then everything went black. Maya woke up in an unfamiliar bed, her head pounding like someone had taken a hammer to her skull. The room was too warm, too dark, and smelled wrong. Not like Kieran's clean, woodsy scent, or even the neutral smell of the pack house. This place reeked of aggression and dominance, sharp and unpleasant in her nostrils. Panic shot through her as memory returned. The fight, using her power to heal Kieran, collapsing from exhaustion. She tried to sit up, but her body felt like it was made of lead. The healing had taken more out of her than she'd realized, leaving her weak and disoriented. "Finally awake, little healer." Marcus stepped out of the shadows by the window, and Maya's stomach dropped to her feet. He looked pleased, satisfied in a way that made her skin crawl, like a cat that had finally caught the mouse it had been stalking. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper, rough from sleep and dehydration. "My territory. My pack house, where you belong now." Marcus pulled up a chair beside the bed, close enough that she could smell his scent, sharp and aggressive, nothing like the warm safety she'd felt with Kieran. "That was quite a show you put on back there. I've never seen healing power like that." Maya forced herself to sit up despite the way the room spun around her. Her body protested every movement, muscles weak and shaky from overextension. "Kieran will come for me." Marcus's smile was sharp and confident. "Let him try. He'll find my borders well defended." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with greed and something that might have been hunger. "But why would you want him to? I can offer you so much more than he can. A pack that will worship your abilities instead of asking you to hide them. Power, status, everything you've been denied your whole life." "You kidnapped me." Maya kept her voice level despite the fear clawing at her throat. "I rescued you from making a terrible mistake." Marcus's voice hardened, showing a glimpse of the cruelty she'd sensed beneath his practiced charm. "Kieran would cage you with his protection, keep you safe and useless, wasting your gifts on small hurts and minor ailments. I'll let you be what you really are." Maya met his gaze steadily, fighting to keep her expression neutral. She needed to figure out how to get out of here, and that meant not provoking him until she had a plan. And what's that? Powerful, dangerous, mine. The possessiveness in his tone made her skin crawl, but she kept her face blank. Around them, she could hear the sounds of pack life, voices, footsteps, the distant clatter of dishes. Normal sounds that felt surreal in this place that radiated menace. "I need water," she said, buying herself time to think and assess. Marcus gestured to someone Maya couldn't see, and a young woman appeared with a glass. The girl couldn't be more than 20, with dark hair and eyes that wouldn't meet Maya's. Everything about her body language screamed fear, the way she held her shoulders, the careful distance she kept from Marcus, the way her hands shook slightly as she set the glass down. "Thank you," Maya said gently, and the girl's eyes flicked up in surprise before she hurried away. "Don't waste your kindness on the weak," Marcus said dismissively, watching the girl retreat with something like contempt. "Save it for those who matter, those with power worth respecting." Maya drank slowly, using the time to study the room and what she could see beyond it. Her power felt different somehow, like something had shifted when she'd healed Kieran. Stronger, but also more settled, more hers in a way it had never been before. "I want to see your territory," she said finally, setting down the empty glass. "If I'm going to be here, I should know what you're offering." Marcus's smile was sharp and satisfied, like she'd passed some kind of test. "Now you're being sensible. I knew you were too smart to waste yourself on Kieran's misguided protection." But Maya wasn't being sensible. She was being strategic. Because she'd learned something important in that brief interaction with the servant girl. Marcus's pack was held together by fear, not loyalty. And fear made people desperate. Desperate enough to help, if the right opportunity arose. She just had to survive long enough to create that opportunity. 3 days later, Kieran crouched in the underbrush at the edge of Marcus's territory, every instinct screaming at him to charge in and tear the place apart, until he found Maya. His wolf had been clawing at him constantly since she'd been taken, a relentless litany of Tarsmate hurt, mate gone, find mate, kill enemies that made rational thought almost impossible. The scent trails were days old now, but he could still pick out Maya's unique signature beneath the stench of Marcus's pack. She was alive. She was unharmed, at least physically. But being separated from her felt like having a piece of his soul carved out with a dull blade. "Alpha, we've scouted the perimeter," Dylan reported quietly, materializing from the shadows with the easy stealth of a born hunter. "He's got twice the guards he normally posts, and they're all positioned to watch for us specifically." Kieran's hands clenched into fists, claws threatening to emerge. "He wants me to come charging in like an animal. Wants me to make mistakes. What do you want us to do?" What Kieran wanted was to shift and let his wolf handle this with teeth and claws. To paint Marcus's territory red and damn the consequences. But Maya had asked him to let her make her own choices, and that meant trusting her to survive until he could reach her. It meant using his head instead of just his rage. We go in quiet. Small team. Dylan, Sarah, and Tom with me. Kieran stood, brushing dirt from his knees and forcing his claws to retract. Everyone else stays here unless we call for backup, and no matter what happens, Maya's safety comes first. Even if it means letting Marcus escape. They moved through the forest like shadows, using every trick Kieran had learned in 20 years of being alpha. The guards were well positioned but predictable, following patterns that made them easy to avoid for someone who knew how to read the forest. When they reached the pack house, Kieran's wolf caught Maya's scent immediately. She was alive, she was unharmed, and she was plotting something. He could smell the sharp edge of determination on her, the particular scent she carried when she was planning something dangerous. He found her in Marcus's office, and for a moment his heart nearly stopped. She was standing beside Marcus's desk like she belonged there, studying a map with focused attention. She looked stronger than when he'd last seen her, more confident. But there was something else too, something in her posture that made his wolf sit up and take notice. "The patrol routes don't make sense," Maya was saying, her finger tracing paths on the map. "You've got blind spots here and here that any competent alpha would exploit." Marcus laughed, and the sound made Kieran's claws itch to emerge. "Already thinking like a Luna, I see. I knew you'd understand eventually. I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want to die because of poor planning." Maya's voice was crisp, businesslike, but Kieran caught the subtle tension in her shoulders. "If you want me to stay, you need to prove you can protect what's yours." Kieran's chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to jealousy. Was she actually considering Marcus's offer? Had the bastard managed to convince her that she'd be better off with him? "Maya's always been practical," Sarah whispered beside him, but Kieran heard the worry in her voice too. That's when Maya's head turned toward the window, her eyes finding his through the glass with unerring accuracy. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the space that separated them. Then Maya smiled, and Kieran saw something wild and fierce in her expression that made his heart race with recognition and pride. "Of course," she continued, turning back to Marcus like their silent communication had never happened. "The biggest blind spot is your arrogance." "Did you really think Kieran wouldn't find a way in?" Marcus spun toward the window just as Kieran crashed through it in a shower of glass and wood. Dylan and the others came through the door at the same moment, and suddenly the office was full of snarling wolves and flying fists. But Maya wasn't cowering or running for safety. She was moving with deadly purpose, her hands beginning to glow with that warm, healing light. Only this time, Kieran realized with savage satisfaction, she wasn't using it to mend. She was using it to burn. Marcus screamed as Maya's power seared across his arm, the smell of burned flesh filling the air. "You little—" "I'm not little anything," Maya snarled, and Kieran felt his wolf's recognition and pride surge through him like fire. "I'm a healer. I know exactly how much damage a body can take before it stops working." Marcus lunged for her, rage overriding strategy, but Kieran was there first. His shoulder caught the other alpha in the ribs, sending him crashing into the wall with a satisfying thud. They went down in a tangle of limbs and fury, but this time Kieran wasn't fighting alone. Maya was beside him, her power flowing between them like a bridge of light. He could feel her strength bolstering his, her energy weaving through his muscles and bones. When Marcus tried to shift, Maya's light wrapped around him like chains, holding his human form in place with implacable force. When Marcus swung at Kieran, she deflected the blow with a barrier of pure energy that sent the other man stumbling backward. They moved together like they'd been fighting side by side for years, anticipating each other's actions with perfect synchronization. "Impossible!" Marcus gasped as Kieran's fist connected with his jaw, splitting his lip and sending blood spattering across the expensive carpet. "She's human." "She can't." "I'm not human," Maya said quietly, and Kieran felt the truth of it resonate through their bond like a struck bell. "I never was. I just didn't remember." Light poured from Maya's skin, as something fundamental shifted inside her, but not into wolf form. Into something else entirely. Something that made every werewolf in the room drop to their knees in instinctive submission. Even Kieran felt the pull, though their mate bond kept him upright and aware. The power that radiated from her was ancient, primal in a way that spoke to the deepest parts of shifter instinct. It was the power of the moon itself, pure and clean and absolutely unstoppable. Moon-blessed, Dylan breathed from where he knelt beside the door. She's moon-blessed. Maya's power filled the room like liquid starlight, warm and clean and carrying an authority that went bone deep. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something far older than any pack or territory dispute. Marcus, you will leave this territory and never return. You will not seek revenge, and you will not threaten any member of Kieran's pack. The words weren't a request. They were a command backed by power that made the air itself vibrate. Do you understand? Marcus tried to resist. Kieran could see it in his face. His muscles strained against the compulsion, his jaw working like he was fighting to form words of defiance. But Maya's power was too strong, too pure. Finally, his resistance crumbled and he nodded, the fight going out of him all at once. I understand, he said, and his voice was hollow with defeat. Maya held the power for a moment longer, making sure her command had taken root. Then she let it fade, the light dimming until she looked human again. She swayed slightly, and Kieran caught her against his chest, pulling her close and breathing in her familiar scent. Are you all right? He asked, his hands running over her body, checking for injuries he might have missed. Maya looked up at him, her eyes still glowing faintly with residual power. I remembered who I was, what I was. Her voice was soft but certain. My family wasn't just killed by rogues, Kieran. They were moon-blessed too, and other packs feared what that meant. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. Moon-blessed shifters were rare, powerful beyond normal limits. They could heal or harm with equal ease, could command other shifters with their voice alone. They were also targets, hunted by those who feared their power or wanted to control it. And now, he asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. Maya's smile was soft but absolutely certain. Now I know I don't have to choose between being powerful and being loved. I can be both. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers warm against his skin. I can be your Luna and your equal, if you'll have me. Kieran's wolf sang with joy and recognition, everything in him settling into perfect contentment for the first time since she'd been taken. Always, he said, and kissed her while their pack cheered around them. When they finally broke apart, Maya grinned at him with fierce happiness. Good, because I have a lot of ideas about how to improve your security protocols. Kieran laughed, pulling her close again and reveling in the solid warmth of her in his arms. Of course you do, Luna. Of course you do. Outside the window, the full moon cast its blessing on them both. Silver light that promised protection and power, and all the time in the world to figure out what they could build together. If you enjoyed Maya and Kieran's journey from strangers to soulmates, please like and subscribe for more supernatural romance stories.